The dust hadn't settled from the last brawl when Jake Sullivan pushed through the saloon doors. The Broken Horseshoe was the kind of establishment where men came to forget their troubles or find new ones. Depending on how the whiskey hit them, Jake wasn't looking for either just a quiet corner and a bottle that didn't taste like turpentine. At 42, Jake carried himself with the measured movements of a man who'd survived too many fights to rush into another one. His weathered face bore the map of hard living, with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw, a souvenir from his cavalry days. The Colt .45 on his hip wasn't for show. Every man in the territory knew Jake Sullivan's reputation. He wasn't a gunslinger by trade, just a drifter who'd proven time and again he could handle himself when pushed. The saloon was thick with smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. Miners, cowboys, and various specimens of frontier life crowded around the tables, their voices creating a din that nearly drowned out the out-of-tune piano in the corner. Jake's eyes swept the room, a habit that had kept him alive through 2 decades of wandering the territories. That's when he saw her. She stood near the bar, pressed against it like a cornered animal. Clara Morrison didn't belong in the Broken Horseshoe any more than a dove belonged in a wolf's den. Her dress, though dusty and travel-worn, spoke of better times, store-bought fabric instead of homespun, with small buttons that hadn't yet lost their shine. Her auburn hair, pinned up in a style that was fighting a losing battle against the desert wind, framed a face that might have been beautiful if not for the fear etched across it. "Come on now, sugar," Bill Hawkins slurred, his meaty hand reaching for her arm. "Just trying to be friendly like, new in town, ain't you could use some protection." Hawkins was everything Jake despised about frontier towns, a small-time tough who mistook cruelty for strength, with his gang of 4 equally worthless specimens backing him up. He terrorized anyone too weak to fight back. The badge on his vest, claiming him as some sort of deputy, was as legitimate as a $3 bill. Clara tried to step away, but Hawkins's friend, a rat-faced man called Skeeter, blocked her path. "Bill asked you nice-like. Ain't polite to ignore a man's hospitality." "Please." Clara's voice was steady despite her obvious fear. "I'm just passing through. I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Hawkins laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "We ain't trouble. Darlin, we're the law in this town. Ain't that right, boys?" The gang laughed, emboldened by whiskey and numbers. Jake watched from his corner table, his fingers drumming against the scarred wood. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems only led to bullets and regret. But something about the woman's dignified defiance, the way she held her chin up even as her hands trembled, stirred something he'd thought long dead. "I said no, thank you," Clara repeated, louder this time. "Now please, let me pass." Hawkins's face darkened. Men like him didn't take rejection well, especially in front of an audience. "You think you're too good for us, some high and mighty lady come to judge us common folk?" He grabbed her wrist, yanking her toward him. The fear in Clara's eyes flashed to something else, anger, maybe even hatred. She tried to pull away, but Hawkins was twice her size. Jake stood up. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through the noise like a knife. Every eye in the saloon turned to him, recognizing the danger in that simple movement. "The lady said no." Jake's voice was low, conversational almost, but it carried to every corner of the room. Hawkins turned, his grip still tight on Clara's wrist. "This ain't your concern. Sullivan? Why don't you go back to your bottle and mind your own business?" "Funny thing about business," Jake said, moving closer with the unhurried gait of a man who knew violence intimately. "When I see 5 men bothering one woman, it becomes my business." "5 against 1, Hawkins sneered. "Those odds don't favor you much." Jake's weathered face cracked into what might generously be called a smile. "I've had worse." The tension in the room stretched taut as a bowstring. Jake had positioned himself between Clara and the gang, close enough to act but far enough to draw if needed. His hand rested casual-like near his holster, but everyone who knew his reputation understood the threat. "You really want to do this over some woman you don't even know?" Skeeter asked, his hand inching toward his own gun. "I want to finish my drink in peace." Jake replied, "The lady wants to leave in peace. Seems like we both want the same thing, peace. Question is, are you boys smart enough to want it too?" Hawkins's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. His pride warred with his survival instinct. Jake Sullivan might be just one man, but his name carried weight. Stories of his gun work, of men who'd thought they were faster and ended up proving they weren't, circulated through every saloon and campfire in the territory. Finally, Hawkins released Clara's wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling. Jake steadied her with his free hand, never taking his eyes off the gang. "This ain't over, Sullivan," Hawkins spat. "You just signed your death warrant for some petticoat you never seen before." "I'll try to lose sleep over it," Jake said dryly. The gang backed toward the door. Hawkins last, his eyes promising violence. "You better watch your back, both of you. This town ain't big enough for you to hide in." After they left, the saloon slowly returned to its normal chaos, though Jake noticed more than a few men suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. He turned to Clara, who stood rubbing her wrist, trying to maintain her composure. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "No, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Best not to think on it." Jake cut her off, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You got somewhere to stay. I was hoping to find lodging, but—" She glanced toward the door where Hawkins had exited. Jake sighed, already regretting what he was about to say. "Mrs. Perkins runs a boarding house 2 streets over. Tell her Jake sent you. She'll put you up and won't ask questions." Clara studied him with eyes that were too knowing for comfort. Green, Jake noticed, with gold flecks that caught the lamplight. "Why did you help me?" It was a fair question, one Jake couldn't fully answer himself. "Maybe I don't like the odds of 5 against 1. Maybe I just wanted to finish my drink without listening to Hawkins flap his gums. Or maybe," Clara said softly, "there's still some good left in you." Jake snorted. "Lady, you don't know me well enough to make that judgment." "I know enough." She extended her hand. "Clara Morrison." Jake looked at her hand for a moment before taking it briefly. Her grip was firm, despite everything. "Jake Sullivan, though you've probably heard that already." "I did." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Sullivan." "Nothing good, I'm sure." "That depends on who's telling the story." She adjusted her travel bag. "I should find that boarding house before dark." Jake walked her to the door, aware of the eyes following them. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the desert horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The town looked almost peaceful in the dying light, but Jake knew better. Hawkins wouldn't let this insult pass. "Thank you again," Clara said. "I won't forget your kindness." "Wasn't kindness," Jake muttered. "Just common sense, and ma'am might be wise to catch the next stage out of town. Hawkins holds grudges." Clara's jaw set in a way that reminded Jake of a cavalry officer he'd once known stubborn as a mule and twice as likely to kick. "I've been running for months. Mr. Sullivan, I'm tired of it." There was a story there, Jake could tell. The kind of story that usually ended with someone face down in the dust. But it wasn't his business. He'd done his good deed for the year. "Your funeral," he said, touching the brim of his hat in farewell, as he watched her walk away, her back straight despite the weight she clearly carried. Jake had the sinking feeling his quiet life was about to get a lot more complicated. He'd faced Comanche war parties, Mexican bandits, and Union cavalry. But something told him Clara Morrison might be more dangerous than all of them combined. Not because she was a threat, but because she made him care, and caring, in Jake's experience, was the surest way to end up dead in the territories. He returned to the saloon and his unfinished whiskey, but the taste had gone sour. Through the window, He could see the last rays of sunlight disappearing behind the mountains. Darkness was coming, and with it, Jake suspected, would come Hawkins and his boys. Let them come, he thought, checking his Colt cylinder out of habit. He'd been living on borrowed time since the war anyway. Might as well spend it on something worthwhile. Even if that something was a mysterious woman with secrets in her eyes and trouble on her heels. The boarding house stood like a weathered sentinel on Maple Street. Its clapboard sides painted a fading white that had long ago surrendered to the desert sun. Mrs. Perkins, a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, had taken one look at Clara and given her a room without the usual questions. Jake's name, it seemed, carried weight even here. Clara spent her first night listening to every creak of the old building, every footstep in the hall. Sleep came in fragments, broken by memories of running and the echo of threats that followed her like shadows. When dawn finally painted the curtains gold, she was already dressed and ready to face whatever the day might bring. From her window, she could see Jake's campfire flickering in the distance, just beyond the town's edge. He'd made camp near a cluster of cottonwoods by the creek, close enough to town to intervene if needed, far enough to maintain his cherished solitude. The sight of that small, steady flame brought an unexpected comfort. 3 days passed in an uneasy quiet. Clara ventured out only for necessities, always aware of eyes following her movements. Hawkins and his gang hadn't made their move yet, but their presence hung over the town like a storm cloud. She saw them sometimes, lounging outside the sheriff's office, making sure she knew they were watching. On the third night, unable to bear the suffocating confines of her room any longer, Clara found herself walking toward the cottonwoods. The moon was nearly full, turning the desert into a landscape of silver and shadow. She could hear the creek murmuring its ancient song, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack. Jake looked up from his coffee as she approached, his hand instinctively moving to his gun before recognizing her silhouette. Mrs. Morrison, he said, neither welcoming nor dismissive. Bit late for a social call. I couldn't sleep, Clara admitted, hovering at the edge of the firelight. May I? He gestured to a log across from him, worn smooth by previous visitors. Your funeral. She settled onto the makeshift seat, arranging her skirts with practiced movements. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. For a moment, neither spoke, finding an odd peace in the shared silence. Coffee, Jake finally offered, producing a tin cup from his pack. Thank you. Clara accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The coffee was strong enough to float a horseshoe, but she didn't complain. Surprised you're still in town? Jake said, poking at the fire with a stick. I told you, I'm tired of running. Running from what? Clara was quiet for so long Jake thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. From the shadow of a dead man who won't let me go. Jake's eyes sharpened, but he kept his tone neutral. Your husband? My late husband's brother, Samuel Morrison, a name that carries weight in certain circles back east. Banking, politics, the kind of power that reaches far. She took a sip of coffee, grimacing slightly. When Thomas died, Samuel decided I was part of the estate to be managed. When I disagreed, well, here I am. Here you are, Jake echoed. He understood now the quality of her clothes, the educated way she spoke, the steel beneath the fear. And he's hunting you. Like I stole something precious from him. Her laugh was bitter. His pride. Perhaps men like Samuel don't take rejection well. Jake knew the type, had put a few in the ground over the years. So you ran west. As far as the railroad would take me, then by stage until my money ran low. She looked into the fire. I thought I could disappear out here, become someone new, naive, I suppose. Not naive, Jake said quietly. Hopeful. There's a difference. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, and Jake felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger. "What are you running from, Mr. Sullivan?" "Who says I'm running?" "A man doesn't choose to live like this," she gestured at his simple camp, "unless he's keeping distance from something, or someone." Jake was silent for a long moment, then surprised himself by answering, "Ghosts. Mostly. The war left me with a head full of them. Then came home to find my wife and daughter taken by fever while I was off playing soldier." He poked at the fire harder than necessary. "Couldn't stay in a place so full of what used to be." "I'm sorry." It was a long time ago. "Does it get easier?" "No," Jake said simply. "You just get better at carrying it." They sat in companionable silence, two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in shared understanding. The fire burned lower, and Jake added another piece of wood, sending up a shower of sparks. "Why do you stay here?" Clara asked eventually. "Near the town. I mean, you could camp anywhere." Jake considered his answer. "Started out just passing through, but something about this place." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm just getting old, starting to think about things like roots again." "You don't seem old to me. 42 years in the territories ages a man fast. You carry it well." Jake looked up sharply, but there was nothing flirtatious in her expression, just honest observation. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him and seen something other than a threat or a tool that he didn't quite know how to respond. "You should get back," he said gruffly. "Not safe to be wandering at night." Clara stood, brushing off her skirts. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Sullivan, and the company." "Jake," he said suddenly. "Just Jake is fine." A small smile touched her lips. "Then you must call me Clara. Good night, Jake." This became their pattern over the next week. During the days, Clara maintained her cautious routine in town, always aware but never cowering. At night, when the walls closed in and memories threatened to overwhelm, she would make her way to Jake's fire. They talked about small things, at first the weather, the creek's water level, the best way to brew coffee over an open flame, but gradually, like layers of dust being brushed away, they revealed more of themselves. Clara spoke of her life in Philadelphia, of a marriage that had started with hope and ended with her husband's death in a carriage accident, of Samuel's increasing pressure, his veiled threats, his certainty that she belonged to him now. Jake shared fragments of his past, his Irish immigrant parents, his enlistment at 17, the battles that still visited him in dreams. He talked about his wife Mary's laugh, his daughter Rose's tiny hands, the apple tree he'd planted that he never got to see bear fruit. "Do you ever think about settling down again?" Clara asked one night, watching him clean his rifle with practiced movements. "Sometimes," Jake admitted. "But thinking and doing are different things. I've got too much blood on my hands for a quiet life." "That blood was shed in war, wasn't it? And since then, defending yourself or others doesn't make it way less." Clara leaned forward, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "You're a good man, Jake Sullivan. I don't care what the stories say." "You don't know all the stories." "I know enough." She stood to leave, then paused. "The man who stepped in to help a stranger, who offers coffee and safety without asking for anything in return, that's the man I know. That's the truth that matters." After she left, Jake sat staring into the dying embers. It had been years since anyone had looked at him and seen good. He wasn't sure he believed it himself, but something about the way Clara said it made him want to try. The next night, she brought dinner stew from Mrs. Perkins's kitchen and fresh bread wrapped in cloth. They ate in comfortable silence, and Jake found himself thinking how natural it felt, sharing a meal by firelight with this woman who was rewriting all his carefully maintained distances. "I've been thinking," Clara said as she gathered the dishes, "about what you said about carrying things. I think maybe it's easier when you're not carrying them alone." Jake met her eyes across the fire. That's dangerous thinking in a place like this. Everything's dangerous out here, she replied. Might as well choose the dangers that come with a chance at something better. She left before he could respond, but her words lingered like smoke in the air. Jake sat up long into the night, watching the stars and wrestling with feelings he'd thought burned out of him years ago. In the distance, a coyote howled, and its packmates answered a reminder that even in the wilderness, creatures sought connection. The ember of something long dormant was stirring in his chest, fed by quiet conversations and the simple grace of shared solitude. It terrified him more than any gunfight ever had, because he knew that caring for Clara Morrison would paint a target on them both. But as he banked the fire and settled into his bedroll, Jake found himself looking forward to tomorrow night, to the sound of her footsteps approaching through the darkness, to the way the firelight caught the gold in her green eyes. He was in trouble, and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't want to run from it. The hammer blow came at dawn. Jake woke to the thunder of hooves and the crack of rifle fire. He rolled from his bedroll, Colt in hand, as riders circled his camp. Hawkins sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, flanked by 8 men more than his usual gang. "Morning, Sullivan," Hawkins called out, his voice carrying false cheer. "Seems you got a visitor last night. Several nights. In fact, that Morrison woman's been keeping you warm." Jake stood slowly, assessing angles and cover. Too many guns, too little shelter. "State your business, Hawkins." "My business." Hawkins leaned forward in his saddle. "My business is that woman owes a debt. See, we got a telegram yesterday. Seems Mrs. Clara Morrison is wanted back east. Murder, they say. Killed her own husband for his money." "That's a lie," Jake said flatly. "Maybe so, but there's $1,000 says otherwise. Dead or alive." Hawkins's grin was pure malice. "Though I suspect Samuel Morrison would prefer alive. He's already on his way with professional trackers. Should be here in 2 days." Jake's mind raced. 2 days. Not enough time to prepare. Barely enough to run. "What's your play?" "Simple. You step aside. We collect the woman and the bounty. Nobody has to die." "Well," Hawkins chuckled, "nobody here has to die." "And if I don't step aside?" "Then we paint these cottonwoods red and take her anyway." Jake heard footsteps behind him running. His heart sank as Clara burst into the clearing, having heard the gunshots from town. "Jake!" She skidded to a halt, taking in the circle of armed men. Her face paled, but her chin lifted. That stubborn streak would get her killed. "Well, well," Hawkins drawled. "The lady herself. Save us the trouble of fetching you." "Whatever lies you've been told," Clara began. "Save it for the judge, sweetheart. Or for Samuel Morrison. I hear he's got special plans for you." Jake moved subtly, putting himself between Clara and the guns. "The lady's not going anywhere with you. 9 guns say different." "9 cowards," Clara spat. "Hiding behind numbers and lies?" Skeeter raised his rifle. "Want me to quiet her down, boss?" "No," Hawkins said thoughtfully. "No damage to the merchandise. Morrison was specific about that." He looked at Jake. "Last chance. Sullivan, walk away. This ain't your fight." Jake felt Clara's hand touch his back, just briefly. Trust and fear and something else communicated in that simple gesture. "Made it my fight the minute I stepped in," he said. "Besides, I never did like unfair odds." "Your funeral," Hawkins nodded to his men. "Take them." What happened next would be debated in saloons for years. Jake's Colt seemed to leap into his hand, firing before most men could blink. 2 riders fell from their saddles. Jake shoved Clara behind a cottonwood as bullets shredded bark around them. "The horses!" Jake shouted, returning fire. His camp was 30 yards from where he'd picketed his mount and the spare he'd been planning to sell. 30 yards of open ground under heavy fire. Clara didn't hesitate. She broke from cover, running in a weaving pattern that would have made a cavalry sergeant proud. Jake covered her, his colt singing its deadly song. Another rider tumbled into the dust. She reached the horses, untying them with fingers that somehow stayed steady despite the bullets whining past. Jake backed toward her, reloading on the move with practiced efficiency. A bullet tugged at his shirt. Another sparked off a rock by his foot. "Mount up," he commanded. Clara swung into the saddle with surprising grace. Jake emptied his colt at the remaining riders, then vaulted onto his horse. They spurred hard toward the desert, leaving chaos in their wake. Behind them, Hawkins screamed orders. The pursuit would come, it always did, but they had a lead. For now, they rode hard through the morning, following game trails and creek beds. Anything to break their track. Jake's knowledge of the territory proved invaluable. He led them through a slot canyon so narrow the horses barely fit, across an alkali flat that would make tracking difficult, and finally into the broken country of the Sangre de Cristo foothills. When the horses began to lather, he called a halt in a box canyon with good sight lines. Clara slumped in her saddle, exhaustion and reaction setting in. "You hit?" Jake asked, checking her for blood.
"No, I don't think so."
She laughed shakily.
"Is it always like this out here?"
"Only on the good days." He helped her down, noting how she leaned into him for just a moment before steadying herself. They watered the horses sparingly from his canteen water would be their most precious commodity now. "We need supplies," Jake said, calculating distances in his head. "There's a trading post at Bent's Fork, half a day's ride. Mexican fellow runs it, doesn't ask questions if the price is right."
"I have some money sewn into my corset,"
Clara offered. Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. Practical. A woman traveling alone learns to be practical. She looked back the way they'd come. "Will they follow?" "Count on it. Hawkins lost 3 men and his pride. Plus there's that bounty to consider. The charges are false. Thomas died when his carriage overturned. The driver had been drinking, everyone knew it. But Samuel needed someone to blame, and a widow is always convenient. I believe you." Clara looked at him sharply.
"Just like that?"
"I've known killers. Clara, you're not one." He checked his rifle, counting ammunition. "Though you might have to become one before this is over." The weight of that statement settled over them. Clara straightened her shoulders.
"Then you'll have to teach me."
They spent the afternoon working their way deeper into the mountains, Jake teaching as they went, how to read the land, to spot water from a distance, to recognize the difference between dust raised by wind and dust raised by riders. Clara proved a quick study, her keen intelligence adapting to survival skills with remarkable speed. "You handle a horse well," Jake observed as they navigated a treacherous slope. "My father insisted I learn to ride properly. He said a lady should be able to manage her own mount, not just perch prettily on one." Her smile was bittersweet. "He died when I was 17. Samuel always hated that father left me a trust he couldn't touch." As the sun began its descent, they made camp in a grove of piñon pines. No fire tonight, the smoke would be visible for miles. They ate cold biscuits and jerky, washed down with water that already tasted of rationing. Jake showed Clara how to load and clean his spare revolver, a .38 Smith & Wesson. Her hands were steady as she worked the mechanism, though he noticed the slight tremor when she aimed at a distant rock. "It's different when it's a man in your sights," he said quietly. "I know." She lowered the gun. "But if it's them or us, then you aim center mass and squeeze. Don't pull. And Clara," he waited until she met his eyes, "don't hesitate. Hesitation kills more folks out here than bullets." They bedded down as darkness fell, using their saddles as pillows. Jake positioned himself where he could watch the approaches, his rifle close at hand. Clara lay near him, close enough for safety but maintaining proper distance. "Jake," her voice came soft through the darkness. "Yeah." "Thank you for not leaving me to them." "Couldn't do it." "Why?" There was genuine curiosity in her question.
You don't owe me anything. This isn't your trouble.
Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was rough. Maybe because for the first time in 20 years, I've got something worth fighting for besides my own hide.
Clara reached out in the darkness, finding his hand. She squeezed it once, then let go. No words were needed.
They dozed in shifts, Jake waking her when the moon was high to take her first watch. He showed her what to listen for the sounds that didn't belong, the silences that meant danger. She sat with the rifle across her knees, every shadow a potential threat, understanding for the first time the weight of keeping someone else safe. When dawn came, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, they were already moving. The trading post at Bent's Fork was their goal, but Jake took a circuitous route, doubling back twice to check for pursuit. It was at the second switchback that they saw them a dust cloud in the valley below, too large and purposeful to be anything but riders.
How many?
Clara asked, shading her eyes. 8, maybe 10. Jake studied the terrain with a tactical eye. Moving fast but careful. They've got a tracker with them.
Can we outrun them?
Not straight running. Horses are already tired. He pointed to a line of cliffs to the west. But maybe we can outsmart them. There's an old Apache trail through those rocks. Dangerous, but it'll cut 6 hours off the trip to Bent's Fork. Clara looked at the forbidding cliffs, then at the approaching dust cloud. I trust you. Those 3 words hit Jake harder than any bullet. Trust was a luxury he hadn't allowed himself in decades. Now this woman was placing her life in his hands without reservation. We'll make it, he promised, and meant it. They turned their horses toward the cliffs, toward danger and hope in equal measure. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger. Ahead, the ancient trail waited like a test of skill, of courage, of the fragile bond growing between 2 people who'd found each other at the edge of civilization. The red dust of their passage hung in the air like a banner, marking their path through a landscape as unforgiving as the men who hunted them. But Jake had survived worse, and Clara was proving she had steel beneath her Eastern manners. Together, they might just make it. The sun climbed higher, baking the desert floor and sending heat mirages dancing across their vision. Every shadow could hide an ambush. Every ridge might reveal their pursuers. But they rode on, 2 figures against the vastness of the West, bound by necessity and something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. The mountains waited, ancient and indifferent. Whether they offered sanctuary or simply another grave remained to be seen. The storm struck without warning. One moment they were navigating the treacherous Apache Trail. The next, the sky split open with a fury that turned day to twilight. Snow, heavy, wet, and driven by howling wind, transformed the mountain passage into a white hell. There, Jake shouted over the gale, pointing to a dark shadow in the cliff face. An old miner's shack, abandoned but still standing, offered their only hope of shelter. They fought their way through the blizzard, leading the horses who stumbled and slipped on the suddenly treacherous ground. By the time they reached the cabin, both were soaked through and shaking with cold. Jake kicked the door open, revealing a single room with a rusted stove, a narrow cot, and gaps in the walls that let the wind whistle through. "Get inside," he ordered, already working to secure the horses under a lean-to attached to the cabin's side. Clara didn't argue. Her fingers were numb as she fumbled with matches from Jake's saddlebags, coaxing life into the old stove with scraps of wood and paper left by previous occupants. By the time Jake stumbled in, she had a small fire crackling. "The horses?" she asked through chattering teeth. "Sheltered as best they can be." He dropped their gear and immediately began stuffing rags and old newspapers into the worst gaps in the walls. "This storm's a blessing and curse both. It'll cover our tracks. But if we're caught here..." He didn't need to finish. The cabin had one door, no back exit, a perfect trap if Hawkins's men stumbled upon it. They worked in silence, making the shelter as secure as possible. Jake found an old axe and split some furniture for firewood while Clara spread their bedrolls near the stove. Their clothes were soaked through, and hypothermia was a real danger. "We need to get dry," Jake said pragmatically. "Hang your things by the fire." Clara nodded, understanding the necessity. Modesty was a luxury they couldn't afford. They turned their backs to each other, stripping down to undergarments and wrapping themselves in the rough blankets from their bedrolls. It was awkward but necessary. Death by cold made no allowances for propriety. They sat close to the stove, sharing what warmth it provided. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing, battering the walls and sending snow through every remaining crack. Clara pulled her blanket tighter, unable to stop shivering. "Come here," Jake said gruffly, opening his own blanket in invitation. Clara hesitated only a moment before moving closer. He wrapped the blanket around them both, their shoulders touching. The shared warmth was immediate and vital. "I've lost everything," Clara said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the wind. "My home, my name, any chance at a normal life. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier to just give in, let Samuel have what he wanted." "No." Jake's response was immediate and firm. "Death's easy. Clara, it's living that takes courage. And giving in to men like Morrison isn't living, it's just dying slow." She turned to look at him, their faces inches apart in the small circle of warmth. "Is that why you keep going, Courage?" "Habit, mostly." Jake admitted, "Been running so long I forgot how to stop. Until... He met her eyes, seeing in them a reflection of his own loneliness and longing. "Until I met someone worth stopping for." The moment stretched between them, fragile and powerful. Clara's hand found his beneath the blanket, their fingers intertwining. "Jake, I know," he said softly. "Me too." Clara's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. "I'm so tired of being strong, of being alone, of pretending I'm not terrified every moment of every day." "You don't have to pretend with me." The dam broke. Clara buried her face against his shoulder, sobs shaking her frame as months of fear and grief poured out. Jake held her, one arm secure around her shoulders, his other hand stroking her still damp hair. He murmured wordless comfort, letting her release the pain she'd been carrying. When the tears finally subsided, Clara lifted her head. "I must look a fright." "You look beautiful," Jake said, and meant it, even tear-stained and exhausted. There was a strength in her that shone through. She studied his face, this hard man who'd shown her more kindness than anyone had in years. Her hand came up to trace the scar on his cheek. "How did you get this?" "Shrapnel at Antietam. Half an inch to the left, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." "I'm glad we are." Clara whispered, "Having this conversation." The space between them disappeared. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing passion as months of loneliness and years of emptiness demanded acknowledgement. Jake pulled her closer, the blanket falling away unheeded as the kiss deepened. Clara's hands framed his face, her touch desperate and tender at once. "Jake," she breathed against his lips. I need to feel alive, to feel something besides fear, please." He pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Clara, are you sure I don't want—" She silenced him with another kiss, pouring all her need and trust into the connection. When they broke apart, her eyes were clear and certain. "I'm sure. For once in my life, I'm absolutely sure." Jake stood, lifting her with him, and carried her the few steps to the narrow cot. He laid her down gently, his hands reverent as they explored the curves hidden beneath thin cotton. Clara arched beneath his touch, her own hands mapping the scars that told the story of his survival. "So many battles," she murmured, tracing a bullet wound on his shoulder. "All worth it if they led me here," he replied, capturing her hand and kissing her palm. They came together with a passion born of desperation and discovery. Two souls who'd forgotten how to hope found it again in each other's arms. The storm outside ceased to matter. The world narrowed to the small circle of warmth they created together. Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow cot. The blanket pulled over them both. Clara's head rested on Jake's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arms encircled her, protective even in this moment of peace. "What happens when the storm ends?" Clara asked quietly. "We keep going, make it to Bent's Fork, get supplies, then head further west, California maybe, or Oregon Territory, somewhere Samuel Morrison's reach doesn't extend." "Together." Jake tightened his arms around her. "If you'll have me. I'm not much of a prospect, a worn-out soldier with more past than future." Clara raised herself on one elbow, looking down at him with fierce determination. "You're everything. Don't you see that you're the first person in my life who's ever put me first, who's risked everything just because it was right?" She leaned down to kiss him softly. "I don't want a prospect, Jake Sullivan. I want a partner." "Then you've got one," he promised. "For as long as you'll have me." They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and whisper. The storm still raged outside, but within the cabin's rough walls, they'd found sanctuary in each other. As the night deepened, they talked in the way of new lovers, sharing dreams and fears. Jake spoke of maybe trying his hand at ranching again, of building something instead of destroying. Clara talked of teaching school, of creating a life where her past couldn't define her. "We could change our names," she suggested. "Become different people entirely." "Maybe," Jake considered. "Though Jake Sullivan's not much of a name to give up." "I think it's a fine name," Clara said firmly. "One worth keeping, worth sharing, even—" Jake's breath caught at the implication. "Clara." "I know it's too soon. I know we're in the middle of running for our lives. But Jake, I also know that what we have is real. More real than anything I've ever felt." He kissed her forehead, then her lips. "When this is over, when we're safe, we'll find a preacher. Do this proper-like." "I'd like that," Clara smiled. "Though, given our circumstances, I think we've already made our vows. To protect each other. To stand together against whatever comes. Till death do us part." Jake agreed solemnly. The wind began to die as dawn approached, the storm exhausting itself against the mountains. They dozed fitfully, always touching, as if afraid the other might disappear with consciousness. Jake woke first, carefully extracting himself to check the weather. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white landscape that would make tracking difficult but travel treacherous. He added wood to the stove and began preparing for their departure. Clara stirred, stretching like a cat before remembering their situation. A blush colored her cheeks as she took in their state of undress, but she met Jake's eyes steadily. "No regrets?" he asked. "None," she assured him. "For the first time in my life, absolutely none." They dressed quickly, the intimacy of the night transitioning to the partnership of survival, as they prepared to face whatever waited outside. Jake pulled Clara close one more time. "Whatever happens, I want you to know last night meant everything to me. You mean everything to me." Clara stood on her toes to kiss him. "Then let's make sure we survive this. We have a future to build together." They emerged from the cabin into a world transformed by snow, their tracks from yesterday completely erased. It was a new beginning in more ways than one. Behind them lay the cold shelter that had witnessed their union. Ahead stretched the unknown, still dangerous but no longer faced alone. Jake helped Clara mount her horse, their hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. She smiled down at him, and in that smile he saw his future if they could stay ahead of the past just a little while longer. "Ready, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked with a slight smile. "Ready, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, sitting straighter in her saddle. They rode out together into the white morning, two souls no longer alone against the wilderness, The storm had passed, leaving them chained stronger together than they'd ever been apart. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them as one. The mountain trail beckoned, dangerous still, but somehow less forbidding. They had found something worth fighting for, worth living for, in each other. They discovered that the broken pieces of two lives could form something whole and beautiful. The sun broke through the clouds as they climbed higher, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. It felt like a blessing, a promise that even after the darkest storms, dawn would always come. The wanted poster was nailed to every tree, post, and building in Bent's Fork. Clara's likeness stared back at them from a dozen angles as they sat their horses at the edge of town, hidden in a stand of aspens. The artist had captured her features well enough to be dangerous, and the text below made Jake's blood run cold. Wanted for murder. Clara Morrison. $1,000 reward, dead or alive. Suspected in the poisoning death of Thomas Morrison, Philadelphia. Fled with stolen bonds and jewelry worth $50,000. Armed and dangerous. Last seen traveling west with outlaw Jake Sullivan, also wanted for questioning.
Poisoning,
Clara said, her voice hollow.
They're saying I poisoned him.
Makes you easier to hate, Jake observed grimly. A black widow instead of a grieving woman. Samuel knows what he's doing. The trading post they'd counted on for supplies now seemed impossibly distant. Every person in town would be looking for that face, dreaming of that reward. $1,000 could change a life out here by a ranch, start a business, escape the grinding poverty of frontier existence. We can't go in, Clara said unnecessarily. No, Jake agreed, studying the town layout with tactical eyes. But we need supplies. Food's almost gone, ammunition's low. He noticed a freight wagon being loaded behind the general store. Wait here. Jake, trust me. He circled wide, approaching the town from the opposite direction. The freight wagon driver was alone, checking his manifest. Jake emerged from cover silent as smoke, his gun pressed to the man's back before he could cry out. Easy, friend, Jake murmured. No need for anyone to get hurt. The driver, a grizzled man in his 50s, raised his hand slowly. Take what you want. I got no quarrel with you. Turn around, slowly. The man complied, his eyes widening in recognition. You're Sullivan. That mean the woman's close by? What woman? Jake kept his voice level. The one worth $1,000? The driver studied him. Though I'm guessing she's worth more than that to you, else you'd have turned her in yourself. You're going to forget you saw me. Jake said, going to develop a powerful need to relieve yourself in those trees over there. Going to take your time about it. The driver nodded slowly. Funny thing, now that you mention it, I do feel nature calling. Might be gone 5-10 minutes. Sure hope nobody steals supplies while I'm indisposed. Jake allowed himself a slight smile. Appreciate your understanding. Had a woman worth fighting for once, the driver said as he walked toward the trees. Lost her to cholera in '61. You hold on to yours. Mr. Sullivan, money ain't worth spit compared to that. Jake worked fast, loading flour, bacon, coffee, ammunition, and medical supplies into 2 canvas sacks. He left $20 on the wagon seat, probably more than the goods were worth, but the driver's humanity deserved reward. He was back with Clara within the hour, the stolen supplies secured to their saddles. She listened to his account with wonder. He just let you go. Not everyone's corrupted by money, Jake said, though we can't count on finding many more like him. They pushed deeper into the wilderness, following game trails and creek beds. The wanted posters changed everything. Before, they were just running from Hawkins and whatever men Samuel sent. Now, every person they met was a potential threat. 3 days later, they learned just how true that was. The cabin appeared abandoned, smoke blackened and listing to one side. They'd approached carefully, desperate for shelter as another storm gathered. Clara waited with the horses while Jake investigated. The interior was dusty but intact and occupied. 3 men sat around a rickety table, cards and coins scattered before them. They looked up as Jake entered, hands moving toward weapons. "Easy," Jake said, keeping his own hands visible but ready. "Just looking for shelter from the storm." The oldest of the 3, a man with a silver threading his beard, relaxed slightly. "Storm's coming sure enough. You alone?" Jake hesitated a fraction too long. "Yeah." Silverbeard's eyes sharpened. "Funny. Thought I saw 2 horses out there." He stood slowly. "You wouldn't be Jake Sullivan, would you? The one traveling with that murderess?" The tension crackled like lightning. Jake measured distances, angles, odds. 3 guns to his 1, but they were sitting. He was standing. Might make it, might not. "Don't know any murderess," Jake said evenly. "No, heard tell she's a real beauty. Red hair, green eyes, worth $1,000. The man's smile was predatory. "That'd set us up real nice for winter." The younger men were standing now, spreading out. Jake recognized the tactical movement they'd done this before. Bounty hunters. Then, not just opportunists. "Even if I knew where she was," Jake said. "What makes you think I'd tell you?" "Oh, you'll tell," Silverbeard said confidently. "See, we also heard you're sweet on her. Man'll say all sorts of things when he's watching his woman suffer." That was the mistake. Jake had been waiting for the assumption that Clara was helpless, that she was just his woman rather than his partner. The crack of a rifle from outside dropped the youngest bounty hunter before anyone could move. Clara's second shot took the middle one in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Silverbeard went for his gun. Fast for an older man. Jake was faster. 2 shots, center mass. The man looked surprised as he fell, as if he couldn't believe his luck had finally run out. Jake checked the bodies quickly. 2 dead, 1 dying. The wounded man looked up at him with fading eyes. She shot us." "Yeah," Jake said quietly. "She did." Clara stood in the doorway, rifle still raised, her face pale but determined. "Are you hurt?" "No. You—" She shook her head, but Jake could see the tremor in her hands now that the action was over. He took the rifle gently, setting it aside before pulling her into his arms. "First time?" he asked. She nodded against his chest. "I kept thinking about what you said. Don't hesitate. They would have hurt you, hurt us both." "You did right," Jake assured her. "You saved us both." They dragged the bodies outside. The storm would handle the burial. Inside, Jake found the bounty hunter's supplies and, more importantly, their correspondence. Letters from Samuel Morrison promising bonuses for bringing Clara back alive. Descriptions of the torture awaiting her. Clara read them with steady eyes, the last of her innocence burning away. "He really means to destroy me." "He means to try," Jake corrected. "But he's not counting on you being stronger than he thinks, or on you having help." They spent the night in the cabin, Clara quieter than usual. Jake gave her space to process what had happened, knowing that taking a life changed a person in fundamental ways. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I'm not sorry," she said. "I thought I would be, but I'm not. They made their choice when they decided our lives were worth less than gold." "That's the truth of it," Jake agreed. "Out here, mercy's a luxury you extend only when you can afford it." "Am I becoming like them, hard and cold?" Jake pulled her close. "No, you're becoming a survivor. There's a difference. You still care, still feel. You just don't let it make you weak." The storm passed in the night, leaving fresh snow to cover the evidence of violence. They moved on at first light, but something had shifted. Clara rode taller in her saddle, her eyes scanning the horizon with new wariness. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, joined Jake in the brotherhood of those who'd killed to survive. 2 days later, they encountered a family of settlers whose wagon had broken an axle. Clara's first instinct was caution, But the children, 3 tow-headed youngsters under 10, melted her wariness. While Jake helped the father repair the wagon, Clara entertained the children with stories and helped their mother prepare a meal.
"You two married?"
the woman asked, noting how Jake's eyes never strayed far from Clara.
"Soon,"
Clara replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Good. Man needs a strong woman out here. Woman needs a partner she can count on." The settler's wife smiled. "You've got the look of a team about you." When they parted ways, the family heading east toward established towns, the mother pressed a small silver cross into Clara's hand. "For luck," she said,
"and to remember that there's still good in the world."
Clara tucked the cross close to her heart. A talisman against the darkness, they fled. The mountains gave way to high desert, vast and unforgiving. Water became their primary concern, each source a potential ambush site. They learned to move like Apache, silent, cautious, leaving little trace. Clara's shooting improved with practice, and Jake taught her to use a knife for close work, though he prayed she'd never need it. "We're changing," Clara observed one evening as they made camp in a grove of juniper. "Have to," Jake replied. "Adapt or die. That's the law out here. When we reach California, will we be able to change back, become normal people again?" Jake considered the question. "Maybe not back to who we were, but forward to who we're meant to be. Together." Clara smiled, the expression transforming her trail-worn features.
"I like the sound of that. Forward, together."
They were 10 days out from Bent's Fork when they saw the dust cloud again, riders following their trail with dogged persistence. Samuel's men or freelance bounty hunters. It didn't matter. The hunt continued, and would continue until they found sanctuary or made a final stand.
"How many?"
Clara asked, no longer the frightened woman from the saloon. 6, maybe 7. Jake studied their back trail. Moving steady, but not pushing hard. They know we can't run forever.
"Then maybe we shouldn't run,"
Clara said quietly.
"Maybe it's time to push back."
Jake looked at her, really looked. The soft Eastern lady was gone, replaced by something forged in flight and violence. Still beautiful, but dangerous now in her own right. His partner in truth. "Maybe it is," he agreed. "But on our terms, on ground we choose." They rode on, no longer simply fleeing but planning. The hunters thought they pursued a desperate man and a helpless woman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The transformation was complete. Clara Morrison, Philadelphia society widow, had died somewhere in the desert. In her place rode Clara Sullivan, not yet in name, but in spirit, a woman who'd learned that survival sometimes demanded terrible choices and that love was worth any price. The sun set behind them, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Ahead lay more trials, more violence, more impossible choices. But they faced them together, forged into something unbreakable by the very forces that sought to destroy them. The canyon was a wound in the earth, carved by ancient waters into red rock walls that rose 200 feet on either side. Jake had discovered it years ago while tracking Apache raiders, a natural killing ground with only one way in or out. Now it would serve a different purpose. "Here," he said, reining in his horse at the canyon mouth. "This is where we make our stand." Clara studied the narrow passage, understanding immediately. "They'll have to come through single file, no room to flank." "You've been learning," Jake said with grim approval. "Question is, can you do what needs doing when they come?" "We'll find out together." They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Jake positioned their horses well back in the canyon, where a small spring provided water and an overhang offered protection. He showed Clara the best firing positions among the rocks, establishing clear fields of fire and fallback routes. "When it starts, you take the high ground there." He indicated a ledge 15 feet up. "Good cover, clear sight lines. I'll hold the mouth." "No," Clara said firmly. "We stand together or not at all."
"Clara."
Would you let me face them alone?"
Jake's jaw worked. "That's different."
"No, it's not." She checked her rifle with practiced movements. "Partners. Remember equal stakes, equal risks." He wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. Clara had earned her place beside him through blood and miles. To deny her now would be to deny everything they'd become to each other. The sun was painting the canyon walls crimson when the dust cloud appeared. Jake counted riders through his field glasses, 7 men. With 2 he recognized. Hawkins led them, his face set in lines of hatred. Beside him rode a man in a black suit despite the heat, sitting his horse like someone more accustomed to carriages.
"Samuel?"
Clara breathed, recognizing the distant figure. "Come to do his own dirty work," Jake observed. "Man must want you bad to leave his comfortable life back east."
"He wants to watch,"
Clara said, her voice steady despite the implications.
"To see me broken before he takes me back."
They took their positions as shadows lengthened across the canyon floor. Jake had given Clara his Winchester, keeping the shorter Spencer carbine for himself. She lay prone behind a boulder, the rifle steady on the rock, looking nothing like the frightened woman he'd first defended. The riders approached cautiously. Hawkins in the lead, they stopped just outside effective rifle range, conferring. Jake could see the moment they realized the trap the way Hawkins's shoulders tensed, how Samuel's hand gestured sharply. "Sullivan," Hawkins' voice echoed off the canyon walls. "We know you're in there. Both of you. Come out peaceful-like and nobody has to die." Jake let the silence stretch, knowing it would fray their nerves. When he finally responded, his voice was calm. "Seems to me you boys are the ones should be leaving. Long ride back to town. Got paper on the woman, Sullivan, legal warrant. You're harboring a fugitive." "Got paper saying the moon's made of cheese, too." Jake called back. "Doesn't make it true." Samuel Morrison urged his horse forward, though still staying cautiously out of range. "Mrs. Morrison Clara." "This is madness. Thomas was my brother. You think I wanted this come back with me? Explain what really happened. I'll see you get a fair trial." Clara's bitter laugh echoed through the canyon. "Fair like the trial you've already conducted in the newspapers, like the bounty hunters you've sent to drag me back. You murdered my brother." "Your brother died because he was drunk and racing his carriage." Clara's voice cracked with long-suppressed anger. "Everyone knew it, but you needed someone to blame. Someone whose money you could claim." "Enough talk," Hawkins interrupted. "Sun's going down. We go in now or wait for dawn." Jake watched them argue, saw the moment decision crystallized. Hawkins gestured to his men, who began spreading out as much as the narrow approach allowed. They were coming. "Remember," Jake murmured to Clara. Steady breaths, squeezed between heartbeats. The first riders entered the killing ground at a walk, rifles ready. Jake let them come, waiting until they were well within the canyon's embrace. His first shot took the lead rider from his saddle. Clara's Winchester spoke a heartbeat later, dropping the second man. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed and reared. Men dove for cover that didn't exist in the narrow passage. Jake and Clara fired with methodical precision, their position allowing them to dominate the confined space. Hawkins rallied his remaining men. Pushing forward despite the deadly fire, they gained the canyon proper, finding what cover they could behind fallen rocks. The battle settled into a deadly exchange, muzzle flashes lighting the growing darkness like angry fireflies. "Behind you!" Clara's warning came just as Jake sensed movement. A bounty hunter had somehow scaled the canyon wall, flanking their position. Jake spun, firing from the hip. The man tumbled down the rocks, but not before his shot creased Jake's shoulder. "You're hit." Clara started to move toward him. "Stay down," Jake commanded, feeling warm blood soak his shirt. "I'm fine." But their position was compromised. Hawkins had used the distraction to advance, and now they were taking fire from 2 directions. Jake made a quick decision. "Fall back to the second position." They moved in coordination, born of trust, one covering while the other displaced. Clara's accuracy with the rifle continued to surprise their attackers. Another man fell clutching his chest. In the growing darkness, muzzle flashes became the only way to locate targets. Jake's shoulder burned, but he kept firing. They'd taken 4 of the 7, but ammunition was running low.
"Sullivan," it was Samuel's voice, closer now. "This is pointless. You're wounded, outnumbered. Surrender the woman and you can go free."
"Counteroffer," Jake called back. "You turn around now, and I won't put you in the ground next to Hawkins." The response came as increased fire, bullets whining off rocks inches from their position. Then, suddenly, silence. Jake strained to hear over the ringing in his ears. "Movement, someone climbing again." Clara saw him first. Hawkins had worked around their flank, approaching from an unexpected angle. She swung her rifle, but he was already too close. The big man lunged forward, knocking the weapon aside.
"I got you now, witch."
Clara rolled aside as Hawkins's knife slashed down, sparking off the rock where she'd been. She came up with Jake's lessons fresh in her mind, her own blade clearing leather in a smooth draw. Hawkins laughed. "You think that pig sticker scares me?" He lunged again, confident in his size and strength. Clara didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped inside his reach, just as Jake had taught her. The blade found the gap below his ribs, angling up. Hawkins's eyes went wide with shock. "You," he gasped, stumbling backward. Clara followed, cold determination replacing fear. "For every woman you've hurt, every person you've terrorized." She twisted the knife. "Go to hell." Hawkins fell, his body tumbling down the rocks. Clara stood over him, breathing hard, blood on her hands but none in her eyes. "Clara," Jake's warning brought her back. Samuel Morrison stood 20 feet away, a pearl-handled revolver trained on her. "You murdered him," Samuel said, his cultured voice cracking. "Just like you murdered Thomas. I see it now, the evil in you." "The only evil here is yours," Clara replied, standing straighter. "Your greed, your need to control." "Drop the knife." Samuel commanded, "You're coming back with me. There are treatments for women like you, asylums where you can be corrected." Jake rose from cover, his Colt centered on Samuel despite his wounded shoulder. "Let her go, Morrison. Take your dead and leave." Samuel's laugh was brittle. "The infamous Jake Sullivan, reduced to this protecting a murderess for what money? Or has she seduced you with the same wiles she used on my brother?" "A last warning," Jake said quietly. "You won't shoot," Samuel sneered. "I'm unarmed except for this." He waggled the fancy pistol. "Practically a gentleman from the East. You'd hang for certain." The standoff stretched taut. Clara stood between them, covered by both guns, her bloodied knife still in her hand. In the darkness beyond, Jake could hear the remaining bounty hunter moving, trying to get position. Then Clara did something unexpected. She laughed, not bitter or frightened, but genuinely amused. "You still don't understand, do you, Samuel? You see me as property to be reclaimed, a problem to be solved. But I'm neither. I'm a woman who's found her strength, and I choose my own fate." She moved then, not toward Samuel or away, but to Jake's side. Samuel's gun tracked her, his finger tightening on the trigger. 3 shots split the night almost as one. Samuel's fancy pistol fired into the dirt as Jake's bullet took him high in the chest. The 3rd shot, impossibly, came from behind them, dropping the last bounty hunter as he tried to line up a killing shot. Samuel Morrison fell to his knees, looking down at the spreading crimson on his starched white shirt with disbelief. "This isn't possible." "Yeah, it is," a familiar voice called from the rocks. "Pretty damn possible." Tom Garrett emerged from the shadows, a smoking Henry rifle in his hands. Jake's old ranger friend looked trail-worn but steady. his badge glinting in the moonlight.
Tom, Jake breathed. How?
Been tracking these buzzards for 2 days, Tom said, keeping his rifle trained on the dying Samuel. Official-like, got word from a freight driver that some dangerous men were hunting a woman on false charges. Figured I should investigate. Samuel tried to speak, blood bubbling from his lips. His eyes found Clara one last time, filled with hatred and disbelief that she'd won. Then the light faded from them, and he toppled forward into the dust.
It's over,
Clara whispered, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. Jake caught her as her knees buckled, holding her tight with his good arm. It's over, he confirmed. You're free. Tom approached, surveying the carnage with professional detachment. Hell of a fight. You two all right?
Jake's wounded,
Clara said, emerging from her shock. His shoulder. I've had worse, Jake protested, though he didn't resist as Clara began examining the wound.
Clean through,
she pronounced with relief. But it needs tending. Tom produced a flask from his coat. For the pain, he said, offering it to Jake. And for the shakes that'll come later, he added quietly to Clara. As Clara worked on Jake's shoulder with steady hands, Tom explained. Been investigating Samuel Morrison for months. Man had a habit of relatives dying convenient-like. Thomas wasn't the first, just the first to have a wife to blame. Will there be trouble? Jake asked. Over this? Tom nudged Samuel's body with his boot. What this bounty hunters exceeded their authority. Attempted to kidnap a woman on false charges. When a duly appointed lawman attempted to intervene, they resisted with deadly force. He spat into the dust. Clear-cut case of justifiable shooting. You ask me. Clara finished binding Jake's shoulder and leaned against him, exhausted. Thank you, Tom. We owe you our lives. Jake saved my hide more than once in the old days, Tom replied. Besides, I never did like bullies or liars. Samuel Morrison was both. They spent the night in the canyon, Tom standing watch while Jake and Clara rested. The bodies would need dealing with come morning. Statements would need to be made. But for now they were alive and together. As dawn broke over the canyon walls, painting them gold instead of yesterday's blood red. Clara stood looking down at Samuel's body. Jake joined her, his arm around her waist. Feel anything? He asked.
Relief,
she answered honestly.
And pity.
He was so consumed by greed and control he couldn't see any other way. Some men are like that. Can't be reasoned with, can't be avoided, only stopped. Clara turned into his embrace. We stopped him. Together. Together, Jake agreed, kissing her forehead. Tom approached, leading their horses. Best we get moving. Need to get Jake's shoulder looked at proper, and you two need to give statements. After that, he grinned. I hear California's nice this time of year. Good place for folks to start fresh. As they prepared to leave the canyon, Clara paused to look back one more time. The place of violence had become a place of liberation. She'd entered as a hunted woman and would leave as a free one. Ready? Jake asked. Clara took his offered hand, squeezing it gently. Ready? Let's go home. Home, Jake repeated, liking the sound of it. Wherever that is, long as it's with you. They rode out of the canyon as the sun climbed higher. 3 figures against the vastness of the western sky. Behind them lay blood and death and the shadows of the past. Ahead stretched endless possibility and the promise of peace earned through courage and love. The hunt was over. The future had begun. The courthouse in Silver Creek stood like a bastion of civilization against the frontier wilderness. Built of solid stone hauled from nearby quarries, it represented law and order in a land that often recognized neither. Jake stood on its steps, his arm still in a sling, watching the morning bustle of a town coming to life. 3 weeks had passed since the canyon fight. 3 weeks of healing, testimony, and watching the slow wheels of justice turn. Tom Garrett had been as good as his word, his ranger's badge and reputation carrying weight with the territorial judge who'd arrived to hear the case. Nervous? Clara asked, joining him on the steps. She wore a simple blue dress they'd bought in town, her hair pinned up properly for the first time in months. She looked like a lady again, but Jake could still see the steel underneath. Should be asking you that, Jake replied. You're the one facing judgment today. We both are, Clara corrected. Everything we've done, everything we've become, it all gets weighed today. The courtroom filled quickly. Word had spread about the notorious case, the Eastern widow accused of murder, the gunfighter who'd protected her, the deadly chase that ended in a canyon painted with blood. Jake recognized several faces from their travels, including the freight driver who'd helped them in Bent's Fork. Judge Harrison Weatherby commanded the room from his high bench, his silver beard and piercing eyes giving him an Old Testament quality. He'd reviewed the evidence for days, interviewed witnesses, even sent telegrams east for information. This court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The matter of the territory versus Clara Morrison. The prosecutor, a thin man named Daniels, sent from the territorial capital, stood first. Your Honor, the facts are clear. Mrs. Morrison fled Philadelphia under suspicion of murder. She enlisted the aid of a known gunman. Together, they left a trail of bodies across 3 territories. Objection! Tom Garrett stood from his place beside Clara. He'd volunteered to speak for the defense, his Ranger's star lending authority. Those bodies were bounty hunters and criminals who attacked first. I'll hear the evidence. Gentlemen. Judge Weatherby intoned. Mr. Daniels, present your case. The prosecutor laid out the accusations methodically. Thomas Morrison's death, Clara's flight, the violence that followed. He produced Samuel's letters, the wanted posters, testimony from a survivor of Hawkins's gang who'd been captured trying to flee the territory. Jake watched Clara throughout, saw her flinch at certain accusations but never waver. When photographs of Thomas Morrison were presented, she gazed at them with sadness but no guilt. The defense may respond, the judge announced after Daniels finished. Tom Garrett rose, every inch the lawman. Your Honor, I've spent the last month investigating this case thoroughly. What I've found is a pattern of lies, manipulation, and greed, but not from Mrs. Morrison. He presented his own evidence. Telegraph records from Philadelphia police confirming Thomas Morrison's intoxication the night he died. Bank documents showing Samuel's attempts to gain control of Clara's inheritance before his brother was even buried. Testimony from 3 separate witnesses who'd heard Samuel discussing his plans to force Clara into marriage or have her committed to an asylum. Mrs. Morrison fled not from justice, but from injustice. Tom declared. Every person who died pursuing her made that choice. They weren't lawmen executing a legal warrant. They were hired thugs hunting a woman for profit. And Mr. Sullivan's role, the prosecutor interjected. Tom's smile was sharp. Jake Sullivan defended an innocent woman against overwhelming odds. If that's a crime, then justice itself is criminal. The judge called a recess. Jake found Clara in the small room set aside for defendants, staring out the window at the free sky beyond. Whatever happens, she said without turning, I regret nothing. These months with you have been more real than my entire life before. Nothing's going to happen, Jake said firmly. Tom's evidence is solid. Evidence doesn't always matter when a woman stands accused. Clara finally faced him. If they rule against me, I want you to leave. Don't throw your life away. Stop. Jake crossed to her, cupping her face gently with his good hand. We stand together, in that canyon, in this court, in whatever comes next. That's not negotiable. When court reconvened, Judge Weatherby called Clara to testify. She took the stand with quiet dignity, recounting her story in clear, unwavering tones. Her marriage to Thomas, his drinking and gambling, the night he died, racing another carriage through Philadelphia's streets, Samuel's immediate attempts to control her, the threats when she refused, the fear that drove her west,
I've done things I never imagined, Clara admitted. I've fought and killed to survive, but I am not a murderer. I'm a woman who refused to be a victim. The prosecutor tried to shake her story, but Clara held firm. When he suggested she'd seduced Jake for protection, she laughed. Mr. Sullivan saved me before he even knew my name. He's the most honorable man I've ever known. If anyone was seduced, it was me by his courage and decency. Jake felt heat rise in his face as the courtroom murmured. Clara's eyes found his, unashamed and full of love. The judge called Jake next. He testified to finding Clara threatened in the saloon, the pursuit by Hawkins, their flight and fight for survival. When asked about the killings, he was blunt. Every man who died made his choice. They could have turned back. They chose gold over sense. That's on them, not us. Oh, you feel no remorse? Daniels pressed. I feel remorse for a lot of things, Jake replied. Defending an innocent woman ain't one of them. Character witnesses followed. The freight driver from Bent's Fork testified to Jake's restraint and honesty. The settler family they'd helped on the trail spoke of Clara's kindness and their obvious devotion to each other. Even Mrs. Perkins from the boarding house made the journey to testify about Clara's character. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Judge Weatherby called for final arguments. Daniels painted Clara as a black widow who'd ensnared Jake in her web. Tom countered with a tale of corruption, greed, and two people finding love while fighting for their lives. Justice, Tom concluded, isn't about punishing those who defend themselves. It's about protecting the innocent from the powerful. Clara Morrison is innocent. The blood on her hands was shed in defense of her freedom and her life. If this court condemns her, it condemns every person's right to resist tyranny. Judge Weatherby retired to chambers. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Jake and Clara sat together, hands clasped, as minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, the judge returned. His expression gave nothing away as he settled behind the bench. This case, he began, represents the conflict between Eastern law and Western reality. In Philadelphia, Mrs. Morrison might have found protection in courts and constables, but she was here, in a land where law extends only as far as a bullet can fly. He looked directly at Clara. The evidence clearly shows that Thomas Morrison died through his own recklessness, not by your hand. The charges of murder regarding him are dismissed. Clara sagged against Jake, but the judge wasn't finished. As to the deaths that followed, including that of Samuel Morrison, the court finds these were acts of self-defense against unlawful aggression. Mrs. Morrison, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others muttered darkly about Eastern money buying Western justice. Jake heard none of it. He was too busy holding Clara as she wept tears of relief, of release, of joy. There is one more matter. Judge Weatherby called over the noise. Mr. Sullivan, please approach. Jake reluctantly left Clara and stood before the bench. The judge studied him with knowing eyes. You've operated outside the law for many years, Mr. Sullivan. Your reputation precedes you. However, your actions in this matter show honor and restraint. Ranger Garrett has recommended you for a territorial marshal's position. What say you? Jake blinked in surprise. I need to discuss it with my future wife, Your Honor. Future wife. The judge's eyebrows rose. I see. Well, as a duly appointed territorial judge, I'm authorized to perform marriages. Unless you'd prefer to wait. Jake turned to Clara, who stood frozen in shock. Then her face broke into a radiant smile. Jake Sullivan, are you proposing to me in a courtroom? Seems fitting, Jake replied, grinning. It's where you got your freedom. Might as well be where we start our future. Then yes, Clara said, coming to stand beside him. Absolutely yes. What followed was likely the most unusual wedding in territorial history. The courtroom served as chapel, the spectators as witnesses. Tom Garrett stood as best man.
Mrs. Perkins as matron of honor. Judge Weatherby performed the ceremony with the same gravity he'd shown during trial. Do you, Jake Sullivan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and hold, in plenty and in want, in sickness and health, forsaking all others, so long as you both shall live? I do, Jake said, his voice strong and certain. Do you, Clara Morrison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and hold, in plenty and in want, in sickness and health, forsaking all others, so long as you both shall live? I do, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife, Mr. Sullivan. You may kiss your bride. Jake pulled Clara close with his good arm, kissing her thoroughly to the cheers and applause of the crowd. When they finally parted, both were laughing through their tears. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Weatherby announced with rare warmth, I present Mr. and Mrs. Jake Sullivan. May they find peace in each other and in whatever path they choose. As they signed the marriage certificate, making it official, Tom clapped Jake on his good shoulder. That marshal's position is real, you know. Town called Harmony needs a lawman. Quiet place, good for starting over. Jake looked at Clara, seeing his answer in her eyes. We'll think about it. They left the courthouse as husband and wife, walking into a sunset that painted the world in shades of gold and possibility. The crowd dispersed, everyone talking about the trial and wedding they'd witnessed. From wanted woman to married woman in one afternoon, Clara mused. Think we can handle a normal life after all this? Don't see why not, Jake replied, pulling her close. We've handled everything else together. They spent their wedding night at the best hotel Silver Creek offered, finally able to register openly as Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan. As Clara lay in Jake's arms, she traced the scars that told the story of his survival. No more running, she said softly. No more looking over our shoulders. No more, Jake agreed. From here on, we build instead of destroy, create instead of survive. Think we remember how? Jake kissed her forehead tenderly. We'll learn together. Everything else we've done that way has worked out. Outside their window, Silver Creek settled into peaceful slumber. Somewhere in the distance, a guitar played a gentle melody, the sound of normalcy, of life continuing in its ancient patterns, seemed almost foreign after months of flight and fight. But as Clara drifted off to sleep, safe in Jake's embrace, she realized this too was part of the frontier story, not just the violence and struggle, but the building and becoming. They'd earned their place in this harsh land through blood and courage. Now they had the chance to earn it through love and hope. The past was judged and finished. The future stretched before them, vast and promising as the western sky. The wagon rolled west under a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the earth. Jake held the reins with practiced ease, his shoulder fully healed after 3 months of Clara's careful tending. Beside him, Clara sat straight-backed despite the long hours, her hand resting on the slight swell beneath her traveling dress. There! Jake pointed to where the trail crested a rise. Just over that ridge. Clara shaded her eyes, anticipation mixing with the fatigue of their journey. They'd left Colorado 2 weeks ago, following the promise of land and new beginnings in California's Sacramento Valley. Tom Garrett's wedding gift, a letter of introduction to a rancher selling property, had set them on this path. As they topped the rise, the valley spread before them like a painting. Golden grasslands stretched to distant purple mountains, dotted with oak trees and cut by a ribbon of silver where a creek wound through. In the distance, a small farmhouse stood with a barn and corral, modest but sturdy. Home? Clara asked softly. Home, Jake confirmed, feeling the words settle into his bones like a blessing. The property was 40 acres of good grazing land, with water rights small by California standards but perfect for their needs. The previous owner, an aging 49er who'd found more golden cattle than mining, greeted them warmly. Jake Sullivan, the old man, Marcus Webb, extended a weathered hand. Tom Garrett wrote plenty about you. Said you were looking for a place to put down roots. That's right, Jake replied, helping Clara down from the wagon. My wife and I are hoping to build something here. Webb's eyes crinkled with approval as he took in Clara's condition. Well, you're starting right. Land needs families to thrive. Come, let me show you around. The house was simple 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a main room with a stone fireplace. But the walls were sound, the roof tight, and the windows looked out on their own land. Clara moved through the rooms with growing excitement, already seeing possibilities. The chicken coop needs repair, Webb admitted. And the garden's gone to seed, but the bones are good. We're not afraid of work, Clara said firmly. Are we, Jake? No, ma'am. Jake agreed, watching her face light up as she explored. After months of running, seeing her plan a future made every hardship worthwhile. They concluded the sale that afternoon, Jake counting out the money they'd saved and inherited Clara's Eastern funds finally serving their intended purpose of building rather than fleeing. As Webb prepared to leave for his daughter's home in San Francisco, he paused. One more thing, he said, leading them to the barn. In the back stall stood a mare, heavily pregnant. Buttercup here is due any day. Consider her a housewarming gift. Ranch needs horses, and she throws good foals. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. We'll take good care of her. That night, they slept in their own bed in their own home for the first time. The silence was different from the watchful quiet of the trail, peaceful rather than wary. Jake lay awake, listening to Clara's breathing and the unfamiliar sounds of ownership, their walls creaking, their wind chimes singing, their future taking shape. Can't sleep, Clara murmured, sensing his wakefulness. Just thinking, 6 months ago, I was a drifter with nothing but a gun and a bad reputation. Now you're a rancher with a wife and a baby on the way. Clara finished. Quite a change. Regrets? Clara turned to face him, her hand finding his face in the darkness. Only that we didn't find each other sooner, though maybe we needed to become who we are first. The next months passed in a blur of work and preparation. Jake threw himself into ranching with the same intensity he'd once brought to survival. He repaired fences, built a larger chicken coop, and learned the rhythms of raising cattle. His hands, so long dedicated to violence, found new purpose in creation. Clara transformed the house into a home. Curtains appeared at windows, herbs flourished in the garden, and the smell of baking bread became a daily miracle. Her belly grew rounder, and with it, Jake's protective instincts evolved from desperate to tender. The mare, Buttercup, delivered a healthy colt on a warm spring morning. Clara insisted on watching, fascinated by the process of life beginning. As the foal took its first wobbling steps, she placed Jake's hand on her stomach. Soon, she whispered. Our turn soon. They weren't entirely isolated. The nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, lived 2 miles away and proved welcomingly friendly. Mary Henderson, mother of 4, took Clara under her wing. Sharing wisdom about childbirth and frontier motherhood, Bill Henderson and Jake discovered a mutual interest in improving their livestock bloodlines. You've got a good eye for horses, Bill commented one day, watching Jake work with the colt. Ever think about breeding? Maybe someday, Jake replied. Right now, just focused on getting established. But the seed was planted. Jake found himself studying bloodlines, talking to other ranchers, imagining a future where Sullivan horses were known throughout the valley. The baby came on a night of thunder and rain, as if making a dramatic entrance to match the tale of its parents' meeting. Jake paced outside while Mary Henderson and the midwife attended Clara. His old combat nerves nothing compared to this new terror. "First babies take their time," Mary assured him during one of her breaks. "She's strong. You're Clara. She'll do fine." Hours passed. Jake wore a path in the porch boards, jumping at every sound from inside. Then, cutting through the storm, came a cry not Clara's but smaller, angrier, announcing arrival with indignation. "Jake," Mary called. "Come meet your daughter." "Daughter?" The word hit him like a physical blow. He entered on unsteady legs to find Clara propped in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a wrapped bundle. "Look what we made," Clara whispered, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect. Jake approached slowly, as if the baby might disappear. When Clara placed her in his arms, the weight was nothing and everything, all his hopes and fears condensed into 7 pounds of new life. "She's beautiful," he managed through a tight throat. "Like her mother." "She has your stubborn chin," Clara countered, then grew serious. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months, but looking at their daughter, only one seemed right. "Hope," Jake said. "Hope Sullivan, because that's what she is. Hope that people can change, can choose love over fear, can build instead of destroy." Clara's eyes shimmered. "Hope Sullivan, perfect." As if approving, the baby opened her eyes, Clara's green with flecks of Jake's brown, and studied her parents with ancient wisdom. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of midnight feedings, first smiles, and the constant amazement of watching their daughter grow. Jake, who'd once thought his hands were fit only for violence, discovered their gentleness as he rocked Hope to sleep. Clara, who'd been raised by nursemaids, found fierce joy in every aspect of motherhood. Their first harvest was modest but sufficient. Jake sold cattle in Sacramento, establishing relationships with buyers who appreciated his honest dealing. Clara sold eggs and vegetables to neighbors, carefully saving every penny toward their expanding dreams. "We could add more acreage next year," Jake suggested one evening, going over their ledgers. "The Paulson place is for sale." "And more horses," Clara added with a knowing smile. "I've seen how you look at the Henderson stallion. Bloodlines matter in horses." Jake defended. "Good foundation stock means everything." "Then we'll build a good foundation," Clara agreed. "In horses and everything else." Hope took her first steps on a golden autumn afternoon, toddling from Jake to Clara with determination that made both parents laugh. As she fell into Clara's arms, Jake felt something settle deep in his chest, a peace he'd never thought possible. "We did it," he said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "Did what?" Clara asked, settling Hope on her hip. "Built a life, a real life. Not just surviving, but living." Clara crossed to him, Hope babbling between them. "We did, together." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jake looked at his family, his wife, his daughter, his home, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a dusty saloon where he'd defended a stranger, through flight and fear and violence, to this moment of perfect ordinariness. "Jake," Clara said, following his gaze across their property. "What are you thinking?" "That every bullet dodged, every mile run, every hard choice made was worth it, because it led here." Hope reached for him, and he took her, lifting her high until she squealed with delight. In her laughter, he heard redemption. In Clara's smile, he saw forever. "Come on," Clara said, linking her arm through his. "Dinner's ready, and tomorrow we need to fix the fence in the south pasture. Bill Henderson said his bull's been eyeing our cows." Jake laughed. The simple concerns of normal life still felt like miracles. As they walked toward their house, Hope chattering in his arms and Clara warm beside him, he sent a silent thanks to whatever force had brought them together. The West had tested them with its violence and vastness. They'd survived by finding strength in each other, building love from desperation, forging a partnership in fire and faith. Now, as the first stars appeared in the California sky, they were writing a new chapter, one of growth and gratitude, of ordinary days made extraordinary by being shared. Behind them, the colt whinnied in the corral, and Buttercup answered. The chicken settled for the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, not a threat now, but simply part of the tapestry of their new life. "Tell me a story, Papa," Hope demanded, her new words precious as gold. "What kind of story, little one?" Jake asked, settling into his chair by the fire. "About Mama and Papa." Jake looked at Clara, who smiled and nodded. "Well," he began, "once upon a time, there was a brave lady who needed help, and a lonely man who'd forgotten how to hope." As he wove their tale edited for young ears, Clara prepared their meal, occasionally adding details or corrections. Hope listened with rapt attention, as if sensing even at her young age that this was more than a story. It was her beginning, her foundation, the legend that would shape her understanding of love and courage. Outside, the land settled into evening peace. Inside, a family born of violence and redeemed by love continued building their future. One story, one day, one hope at a time. The Wild West had made them. Now, they were making it into something new. A place where broken people could become whole, where love could conquer fear, where the setting sun promised not an ending but another beginning. Jake Sullivan, gunfighter turned rancher, looked at his wife and daughter in the firelight and knew with bone-deep certainty this was worth every scar, every mile, every moment of doubt. This was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story, dear friends. I hope the journey of Jake and Clara touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Please leave a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with fellow lovers of Western romance. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering all odds, please consider subscribing to Wild West Night for more stories that'll warm your heart and fire your imagination. And don't forget to hit that like button and give us a hype to help more people discover these wonderful stories of the Old West. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.